Hello there. You meet me at a very special studio that we've had to rent out. Mainly because I've sent a lot of messages to a couple of very important figures in both the regular and the modded community. However, I haven't got any way to receive those messages outside of channeling them through the speakers of the toy soldier. Problem is, we had to get a studio which had its own electrical room, because otherwise it would kill me. Okay, so I'm gonna read through all of the questions I asked for the other ones, and you, Toy Soldier, you're gonna have to read out every response that they gave. Am I making myself clear?
As clear as a sunrise, my master.
Okay then, let's start with a really broad question which I asked everyone here, both from the regular side and the modded side. What's your opinion on modded Roblox games as a whole?
Well, that's a very strange question because it mostly depends on the game's past history and such. AUT didn't have a very good history with these modded games because most of the time they ended up raiding our Discord server or the game itself. Though, personally, I think that it's a shame because there are still people supporting these modded game owners as they're really just exploiters who steal assets and scripts from the original game. I personally don't hate them, and I think that you're somewhat misinformed. We don't really ban the players who play modded games. We bans their dev, staff, any high ranking, basically. For the case of Sasha, their whole community is being banned because they're leaking shit, not because they're playing the modded game. Actually, I think I can answer RN, but I mean, I don't really play them that much. I think that if the modded game has ripped assets, then I don't really think it's okay. But then again, I animate for 2 modded YBA games. It honestly really depends if they built their engines themselves or just took them. For example, all those ABD modded games out there just reuse ABD's source code without making their own and just basing their gameplay to the original, which to me is just straight up stealing and reusing it for your own personal gain. But if people just remake their things from the ground up and can properly prove it, then I don't really see much of a problem. Personally, I think it's okay to make a fan game of a game you love with its own content, as long as no assets are being stolen and money isn't being made off it. The issue with a lot of modded games is that they plainly rip assets without permission, with little effort put into original content. If modded games weren't stealing assets, I'd be fine with them. The worst part is that a lot of modded games also make money, so they're profiting off the hard work of other developers with little of their own effort in preparing assets and such. Modded games tend to be pretty fun with friends. That is, if the original game gets really boring. Modded games are mainly seen on anime-type games, but there still exist a few on non-anime games. Although people do tend to be against the creators of modded games, because at the end, they're stolen. They do have a right to be upset about it, but not to flat-on harass them about it. But certain modded games, as per my experience, usually don't go well. The managers of other games or owners may end up being people who they really don't seem to be. Rather, people who don't tend to make the right choice, who's usually in it for the short-term money without actually caring for the experience of others. But if you ask me my personal opinion on modded games, it's heavily dependent on how the game is managed, whether that'd be the staff, owner, community members, where everyone can get together and have a good time. Although modded games don't make us seem any innocent because people will plaster us with working for stolen things and some other nonsense. They don't realize that we're just trying to have time for ourselves. But that's only for a rare few. This would be the case of NU. I've also managed games like ABDM, and have noticed how much of shithole things can be for other modded games as well. though I won't name them. Similar to like FNAF fan games or Half-Life mods, a guy or a whole team wants to add his or their own ideas into it, see if they are good or not. Some can be memey in cases to some Half-Life mods like Crack Life or Half-Life Randomized. Others can be a neat twist, like Half-Life Echoes. And some, not all but some, can be beautiful things. Modded games in Roblox is no different. You get some assets, recreate the base, and see how it would look like in the style of that game. Some can be good, like AUT being an old ABD modded, still using some of its mechanics and scripting, or NU, which is YBA, but mod specs and more non-JoJo abilities. Others can be not so serious, made for fun, and some are downright horrendous.
Okay then, this next question should only be answered by the people behind the modded games, and I'm just gonna jump immediately to the big question. What is your response to the "this is stolen code and you are a thief" argument?
I usually don't respond to this because in most cases, people tend to defend themselves or try to humiliate them with the most random answers such as "Who are you?" type EA relevancy or any other things when what the members say about the whole stolen thing is practically true. Unfortunately, I'm not an owner and have never been of my own modded games, but I'd probably make a decision to be respectful as to not make any profits out of it. Although profits will be required for consistent updates to pay developers. When you get deeper into the whole topic of modded games, it won't feel as heavy as it is, and you end up getting used to it. It's basically an unavoidable question, but you shouldn't make yourself look like a total clown, being as far as arrogant and acting like it's just a game or whatever. I let them yap. What does it matter if the game or code or whatever is stolen? What will that do to the original game? Kill it? No, it won't.
Alright then, let's move on to a question for the original developers. Everyone always makes the argument that due to premium payouts existing, people who run these games do them for profit. And I have two questions in regards to this. Firstly, what's your notion over that general idea? And secondly, would it be the same way if premium payouts could be toggled?
Well, like I stated before, I don't really hate modded games. And I think that in a way, modded games can actually be pretty fun for the community. But the main problem is that usually these modded games have access to the game's hidden files, which basically allows them to leak upcoming contents and ruin the hype for everyone. I don't think that having a premium payout toggle would change my stance on it, because no matter what, you shouldn't be stealing and causing trouble to the devs of the original game for no reason.
Honestly, I don't know.
Premium payouts in the end are not handled by the developers unless they specifically add features to keep people engaged into the game as long as possible on purpose. i.e. AFK rewards, playtime rewards. So to properly answer this, I'd say that if you make something without properly intending to make a profit, then this argument will always fall flat, as this is out of their control, unless, of course, they go out of their way to monetize that payout by, like I said, doing their best to keep them on their game instead of the original. I don't think it's possible to make a game without making some sort of profit on Roblox due to premium payouts existing. So if someone's using other people's assets in a game, they're making some sort of profit, whether they claim to or not. If Roblox allowed developers to toggle premium payouts, then these games could exist without making a profit. But it still doesn't feel right if they're using stolen assets. For example, let's say I made the Luffy models for AUT. If I saw them in another game, profit or not, without my permission, I'd feel upset about it. And if they asked for permission, I'm pretty sure most developers would say no. So bottom line, just make your own assets. Skilled developers can imitate other models, animations, and such, without stealing them.
Okay then, now I'll extend this question with a little bit of a touch up to the context to the modded side. What's your opinion on the "you get premium payouts, you're stealing money" argument? Because, you know, you can't turn them off.
This used to be the case, but now word has it that you can apparently turn them off. I'm not sure if this actually exists, because I was never bothered to actually check. But I'd highly doubt anyone would want to turn it off, because the funds are required to create new content to keep the players engaged. Pays to developers keep getting expensive, and standards and expectations of players keep arising drastically. So unfortunately, despite knowing that this is somewhat of a bad thing, some of us, like us, in this instance for all honesty, just want to create good content that can appeal to people, taking in constant suggestions and feedback, and speaking to them with their concerns. In YBAL's instance, the owner could not disable this and thus, rather, gave all the money earned to other people in games like PLS Donate. However, I don't think he required funds because the game only focused on nostalgia rather than new content. But the same cannot be said for YBANU. So his supporters was based of voluntary work. In our instance, it's also almost voluntary, but we do end up giving Robux to staff, etc. for the amount of work they've done for us. Annoying that can't be turned off, yes, but an alternate is giving the Robux back to the original developers, or as you said, required for the constant update for games to survive, as it'll end up being dry. And the motives play the important part. It all comes down to who manages the game, whether if they truly hold values and seek what's right, or are just a bunch of people consumed by greed.
Alright, let's shift up the subject just a little bit. So, let's start with a question that I extend out to the original devs. If a modded Roblox game aims to try and capture an earlier point in the game's history, say for example the early 2022 era of AUT, would you consider that as an act of preservation? Or is it still falling under the same umbrella as the rest?
Well, you see, even for old AUT, all assets were obtained or made via dev commissions and such, which means that Kur or Nub actually had to pay for these assets. So by using some kind of script to take these assets without them allowing it in the first place is counted as stealing, which means that we'll have to ban all their hours, just like the rest. The best solution is to prove that you can be trusted with the preservation work and ask for permission from the original owners. It all depends on the obtainment method. I'd say that it's kinda two-sided, like, yes, it's the old game, but the people who actually made most of the game aren't really making the money from the game. That is honestly a really, really good question, because we as humans should always strive to preserve our history, I'd say. I don't actually know how to properly answer this question, besides trying to reach out to the original party's creators for these things to be an official release. But going by just my thoughts in the moment that is now, I'd say preservation takes the win here, albeit it should probably not be in a playable state, as in public, and just be available to download copy for your own experiences. I feel like this is more difficult to answer for a platform for all kinds of games, like Roblox, Little Big Planet, or other online services that rely on user-generated content for their experiences. I think that could serve as preservation, as long as it's not a recent phase of the game. I doubt the AOT dev team really cares about the old universe and its stuff at this point. But we also do have our own copy of OU anyways. It's one thing if a game is taking the current game and trying to add stuff to it. But it's another thing if they're taking a really old version and releasing it publicly, I guess. But I'm not totally sure. how the rest of the team would feel about this.
And now once again, I'll extend this question to the other side of the coin, but with a slight change in context. In your opinion, do you think that modded games are doing more for the sake of preservation than the majority of their original devs would do?
I would say it's a 50-50 when it comes to preservation. YBA. Hell is an instance in this. It was not made for money, rather to recreate the fun times people had back when YBA was at its peak with consistent updates. Unfortunately, that's far from the truth nowadays. So, while there may be good developers who'd focus on preservation, the same cannot be said for another few, as they may just be in it for the short-term money. Because, at the end, any decent modded games owners would at least want their players to have genuine fun in the game, especially if the original failed to meet the standards of the people.
Let's move on to a different subject. Bans. This time, starting with the original devs again. So, in your opinion, at what point does something for a modded game stop going from curious playing and cross over to the bannable territory? Because the line is kind of blurry.
Actively promoting or supporting the modded game. That's usually the line. If it's just the same game as the non-modded one, but just with KJ, then I'd say that's bannable. But I mean, if it's a game that doesn't have assets ripped, and the devs made everything in the game, then I'd say that's more acceptable. I feel like the most crucial aspect of this would be exposure. If you're someone with power, or let's say a large following, and expose these types of games to the wild, you're more or less advertising the game no matter what. And that is probably the biggest issue with these things. But then again, I feel like you should also connect this argument to the intention and reasoning behind the existence of the game to begin with. As for what bannable territory is, that is not for me to decide. I haven't done proper research, or sat down and thought about that to give a proper take on it. I feel like content creating on the modded game has already crossed that line, and anything past just initially trying the game is crossing it. Like it's one thing to hop on the game and want to see what's up with it, but it's another thing to start playing it properly. 'Cause you're giving these people your playtime, and, directly or not, your money. I also personally wouldn't join their discords either. 'Cause I know really well that I wouldn't join the Discord for a modded game that I'm just trying out.
And now I bring it back to the modded side with another slightly recontextualized question. When devs for the original games ban anyone who associate with the modded games as a whole, do you think that's overdramatic or justified?
Good question. In my opinion, it's justified to an extent. Supporting any modded games in any way should at least hold you liable for punishment, because even if I was the original owner of a game, I'd be bound to feel demotivated, or rather angry, for how people support a fake copy, which probably doesn't even use my consent, which is the cases for modded games these days. However, do not get mixed up with supporting modded games and playing modded games. In this instance, we've seen YBA ban people for just even playing modded games. NU turned out to rack a decent players, and because of this, the rules have gotten strict, despite the admins over there even claiming that you don't actually get banned for just playing itself. When, in reality, according to a few members of ours, they just got banned simply because of playing the game itself, rather than actually getting you banned if you either made content on it or had a higher role in the game. So, as for whether, if overdramatic has any involvement, not really, unless it starts to get on a personal level or really bad beef. But of course, this is understandable because at the end, it's a modded game and it's a copy of the original, which is kind of stealing players from them itself. To be honest, it depends on who is banned and what does associate with the modded game mean to them. If someone who makes videos or advertises it gets banned, and they get banned from the original game, then I guess if a member is banned just because he asked one question, or even plays the game, then overdramatic as hell.
Now then, the last major topic I want to cover until we get to some more out there questions is in terms of money. But to mix things up a little bit, I'm going to start by talking to the modded side. And what I want to ask them is, do you think that the devs are actively losing money because of the existence of modded games? And if so, how much?
This one should have been obvious from the get-go. Yes, it can have an impact on income depending on how big the modded game is, because these are potential players who are supposed to play the original game rather than the fake. I highly doubt the developers will lose that much money, because modded games aren't usually that big, but it's still a loss. But these players tend to be either banned players from the original, or are players looking to spend time on something that could satisfy them, or that seems intriguing to them. But as for how much do they lose, that's on the player counts of the game. Let's say a modded verse of a game tends to have like 400 to 600 players. This is just an example. You could end up losing like 20,000 to 30,000 Robux per day, which can have an impact on the long run, unless you manage to take down the fake, which is kind of a 50-50, since NU has been taken down on multiple occasions, but never actually got deleted. But then again, my opinion, this can also be a way of making a name for the original, because you're kind of promoting the original as well, if that makes sense. So people will still hold a stronger view or perspective on the original, probably. I think modded games existing get more players into the OG game and modded game. One guy finishes the OG game, sees a mod and plays it, likes it, advertises to other friends. Play the RG game, play the modded one, have fun. It can also be vice versa. Some gamers like the original, others like the modded. So no, they don't lose money. They gain money.
Now, I was going to ask something similar to the original devs, but then I realized that I already sort of covered over that with the whole premium payouts thing, and I generally got my answers from them, so go back to those sections if you want sort of a similar answer to that. So now let's get on to some of the smaller questions, which I still kind of want to have cleared off my head. First things first, to the original teams, Roblox recently added a rights manager feature, which lets you file takedown notices for any games that may have stolen assets made by the person filing them. Are there any thoughts in the team about using this feature? And if so, is it doing anything?
Not gonna lie, I didn't even know that the feature existed. But personally, I don't think that Kerr or Nub will take actions against smaller devs, unless they're actively breaking our rules and causing problems for us. So if certain lines are crossed, they'll probably have to use that feature. I honestly have no idea about this, so I can't say.
Okay then, here's a question specifically for the modders. Do you think that modded games are too intimidating for newer people to play, considering how taboo the original devs try to make them?
As simple as I can try to be here, they do tend to over-exaggerate about it, as if the world was being cooked alive. Newer players may be intimidated to play the modded verse, being scared of whether they may be punished in the original. Because they probably don't want to get on anyone's bad side, other than just play the game, unless they are like 13 and they try to act gay just to be funny or something. Or they were already kicked off from the original, like if they did something wrong. Or the people over there being rude or just unfair, which thus makes them have a bad image on the game itself. Or just dislike the developers or the managers of the game because of the lack of expectations that aren't met or are up to the people's standard.
Alright then. I've got one more universal question for everyone here, and then we'll be packing our things and going home. So, do you think that a modded Roblox game is comparable to a modded regular game, or is it an entirely different concept with the same name?
This question has many answers to it as it depends on which game you're talking about. The high-effort ones or the low-effort ones. But ultimately, I think that they're pretty much the same. Only difference being the fact that people who made modded regular games actually spent a good amount of time to work on their mod. So it's fun for everyone, while Roblox's is just stolen assets being reused, or them giving people WO to admin abilities. It's different with the same name, 'cause most modded games are just the base game with added stuff to them. And mostly, everything is free in these modded games. It honestly also depends on here, as there are games which have a thriving aspect in the modding community. Terraria, Minecraft, Binding of Isaac, in which the original developers, usually excluding Minecraft with their newer releases, aim to provide that feature to the players. On Roblox, you cannot really do that due to how their platform is built unless you make your entire game source public. So I'd say it's comparable to the regular game, just with fan-made extension added onto it via those mods. Try to connect this point alongside the intent and reason for the modded game existing in the first place. As stated before, if the game doesn't intend to do any harm, then it can be seen as an okay thing, more or less. The most damaging part of these modded games is always reusing things that aren't theirs, or to make a profit from someone else's name. It's an entirely different concept, and let me give an example. When people talk about Terraria modded, they're talking of adding extra content to the base game, so the playtime and all still goes to the original game and such. On Roblox, a modded game is its own unique instance of the game, with its own extra things. Even if the mod creators earned money on Minecraft, for example, playing the mod would still require running the actual Minecraft. I believe they are comparable. As far as what I've seen, people tend to have a lesser, bad image in terms of views on the modded regular games as compared to the Roblox ones. Anyone would be excited to see what others have created for the regular ones, whether it could be really fun or good addition that the original has not added. But like you've asked me before, the developers are the ones on Roblox that demonize the modded verse. Unfortunately, I have no prior experience when it comes to a regular modded game, but I'd only assume that there's no actual arguments between a regular one, other than just a bunch of legal takedowns being taken. But as far as it goes, developers have managed to demonize most anime modded games. But it doesn't seem to be the same result for non-anime ones. But the TLDR is, I'm not exactly sure of this entirely. Tough to say in all honesty.
Alright then, that should be every question I wanted to ask. Thank you all so much for agreeing to answer these questions, because for some of you, it wasn't very easy to get a hold of you. And if anyone's questioning why I even did this and gave a platform to the people who made the modded games, if there's someone far on one side and vice versa, it's because I wanted this video to sort of prove as like an origin point for a lot of opinions towards what people have in regards to the argument of fuck modded games or modded games are cool. It all comes down to personal preference, really, whether you care about the earnings of the original devs, or you want the controls for a game, especially one that's somewhat old, to be in the hands of the people. And no, I don't see this as a way to end the debate. I just wanted this to be more clear, because there's a lot of grey areas in regards to this. So I hope everyone on each side is more educated on what the other one thinks.